Hey everyone, and welcome to my rating of the 2023 F1 tracks using Tier Maker. So I'll be rating the tracks based on my personal opinion of them. This is not necessarily based on how good the racing is at each track, and also not necessarily just based on how important the track is to keep on the F1 calendar. This is based purely just on my personal opinion on the tracks, which could be made up of the uniqueness of the track, the atmosphere I think the track has, its location, and of course racing and historical significance will play a factor, but it's not what my list will be based on. And feel free to leave your own list below. But starting off, we have Yas Marina, which I'm going to put at average. I think Yas Marina is just an average track and basically says it all. I don't think it should be hosting the F1 finale. I think that should be going to a track such as Interlagos or back to Japan. But I think, especially with the recent track changes, it's actually a semi-decent track, especially Sector 1. Sector 1 is much better now. The cars can follow much more closely onto that first straight, which makes overtaking into that first chicane much better. I'm not sure why they put a banked left-hander. It's not really banked, it's only a couple of degrees banked, but it makes overtaking much more difficult there because there's no hard braking zone anymore. It's more of a medium braking zone where you can't really dive bomb another car just because of how fast the corner is. I would have preferred if they had left a chicane, probably not the same chicane, but a different type of slow speed corner which allowed cars to race each other into it. But yeah, anyway, Yas Marina, a bang on average F1 track. Baku, straight into the decent category. Ever since it came onto the calendar in 2016, even though 2016 was an average race, the races since then have been very good. And even though it's dropped off a bit in the recent 2022 regulations, I think that's not helped the raceability at the track. It's still a very unique location. It's a street circuit, but it's got an incredibly long straight and it provides setup challenges for the teams. And it still manages to produce some decent racing most of the time. So I think it's a very decent track. I like it. I would keep it on the calendar. Next, we have Barcelona. Now, this one's a bit more difficult given its track changes it had for this year, made the racing much better, and that's what I'll be basing my opinion off mostly for this. But I think Barcelona is very good. I think it's a very good track, especially when they removed that little chicane, which should not have been there. It ruined the flow of the entire track. But now without that, I think cars can overtake much better into turn one because they can follow much more closely through those high-speed corners. It's got a mix of all types of corners. I like its location. It's been on the F1 calendar for a while. It's significant then. And even though we do testing there, I think the track itself is cool. It's unique. It's got a mixture of everything. And I just think it's a very good F1 track. And I think this year's race really showed us. Austin, straight into must-have. I love Circuit of the Americas. I think Circuit of the Americas is an outstanding F1 track, especially by modern Tilke standards. I think it takes the best elements of many tracks. It takes Maggots and Beckett's from Silverstone for its Sector 1. It takes that Turkey Turn 8 style in its Sector 3. And the racing here is superb. Even the slow corners at the beginning of Sector 3 allow cars to go side by side, which is not very usual. You can have different lines through there, and I think it creates great racing. So I love Austin. I think out of all three American tracks, it was the one I would 100% keep on the calendar for a moment, and it's a must-have track. Next, the Hungaroring. I'm putting this track at average. I've never really liked it, the Hungaroring. I don't think it's a great track. I understand it's been on the F1 calendar for ages. It's got plenty of iconic moments, and I'm not saying we should remove it from the F1 calendar. I just think the track itself is average. The straight isn't really long enough for overtaking unless you've done a dive bomb. And then that second straight they have is basically pretty much pointless. You can't get enough overspeed on the car ahead to even try and overtake around there. The Hungaroring is unique in the way it's laid out. It's basically all medium speed corners, and it presents an interesting challenge to the drivers with how you have to basically, each corner links into each other. So you have to very much get yourself in a sense of flow when you're driving this track. Otherwise, you're just on a bleed lap time. But I don't think the racing it produces is very good, especially with those two 180 degree slow speed corners they have leading on to the really only main straight. So for me, it's just an average track, but I would definitely keep it on the calendar. Imola. Straight into remove, unfortunately. Again, this is similar to the Hungaroring for me. It's played a huge part in F1's past. It's had its iconic moments, its sad moments, but I think Imola should be left in the past. I don't think we need to keep the track on today. Obviously, it came on as a filler for 2020, and it was great because it was filling a spot. We got more races in, but I don't think we need 2 Italian tracks on the calendar. I think Monza suits that role well, and if anything, if we're going to have 2, I'd much rather us go back to Mugello, which I think is a much more interesting circuit than Imola. I don't think the circuit produces very good racing and overtaking. It's interesting. It's got unique corners, which I do like about it, but I just don't think it's up to really the modern F1 standards. I don't think it's wide enough, and I'd prefer just to F1 to go to a track like Sepang over Imola, which I think most people would actually prefer. But yes, Imola's in remove. We don't need 2 Italian tracks, and I think we should just leave Imola in the past and move on. Interlagos is going straight into must-have. Interlagos is one of the best tracks on the F1 calendar, if not the best. It's got unique corners. It's got the center S's. It's got that tight, twisty infield section, and it produces outstanding racing. And it's also got the history to match. So Interlagos must remain on any F1 calendar going into the future, and I would not be getting rid of it anytime soon. Jeddah. New track, first on the calendar in 2021, and it's going into very good. I really like the Jeddah Corniche circuit. I think it's unique in it's a street circuit, but it has an incredibly high average speed. I like its uniqueness of Sector 1, tight, twisty, high-speed corners, and then you go into a lot of straights. I think it provides great racing. I think the races there, 2021, 22, and 23, have all been extremely good, and I would keep it on the calendar. Again, there's some issues outside of the track itself in Saudi Arabia with human rights issues, but I'm just talking about the track today, and I like the track, so I'd keep racing there. Vegas is difficult. We just had the first race there, so I only have 1 to go off, but I'll put the track into, I think, just decent for the moment. It's hard to go off just 1 race. The race itself was outstanding. It was very good. You had passes for the lead, but I don't think I can put it any higher just based off 1 race. Obviously, Las Vegas is mostly about the show, and I think all F1 fans have to really accept that. But I was happy that the circuit was able to deliver a really decent race, and yeah, I don't really have that much to say about it. I think it's a decent track. Maybe in a couple years after we've had a couple more races, and they're all good races, I'll bump it up to very good or must have. But yeah, just for the moment, it's going to be sitting at decent. Albert Park is going straight into the must have category for me. I am Australian, so I am incredibly biased here, but I love the Albert Park circuit. I love the backdrop. I think it's also very unique. It's not like many other circuits. You race around a lake with the city in the backdrop. I think it's great. I would love for it to go back to hosting the season opener, but I don't think it will. I would love for it, but I think Bahrain and Saudi Arabia will have that pretty much tied up for the future. But Albert Park, I don't want to see it go from the calendar. I love the track. Mexico, Bahrain, straight into remove. I really don't like the Mexico Grand Prix circuit. There's something just wrong about it. I think it produces horrible racing, especially with that Sector 3 through the stadium. It's awful. It's just bad. The Mexican crowd is great. I love the Mexican crowd. They turn up, they support Perez. That's all great, but that circuit is so bad. I don't like any of the corners that are situated on this circuit. The first chicane is just clunky, and then the slow speed corners they have at the end of Sector 1 at the start of Sector 2 are just slow and cumbersome. They don't allow side-by-side racing. The only redeeming factor is the S's. And then, of course, Sector 3. The F1 cars can't follow through that section. It spreads them out too much. So by the time you get to the long main straight where you think cars will be able to overtake, they're spread out. I would love to see them go back to the old Perotada that they used to have, that was a completely 180-degree banked high-speed corner. I think that improved the racing greatly. And honestly, I would prefer to them to go back to the old layout before Tilke laid his hands on it and created this monstrosity, but I think that's probably quite impossible. Next, Miami is also going in the remove category. Track-wise, I think the Miami track has some potential. It's Sector 3 that, again, ruins this track. It spreads out the cars before the long straight, and it's clunky. Sector 1 and Sector 2, I think, are quite decent, actually. I like the S's that they have and that straight, which really isn't that straight. So Miami has some potential, but I just don't see this point in having it on the calendar anymore. it's kind of been overshadowed by Las Vegas now. I think Miami was portraying itself as the glitz and glamour of F1, or the best F1 race you should be going to all season with the most amount of celebrities. But Las Vegas kind of overtook it with that race this year. And it's not a true races track. It's not like Austin. It's a street circuit. So I'm not sure what it's trying to fill on the F1 calendar. And for that reason, I would just remove it. I don't see the point in having another... I just don't see the point in having Miami on the calendar. I think 2 races in the US is enough. I understand the US is a big market, but if you're going to add a 3rd race, it has to be fulfilling a specific purpose, which Miami is not. Monte Carlo, straight into average. I think as a spectacle on Saturday, Monaco is great. As a race on Sunday, it's awful. I would have qualifying as a must-have if I could, and then the race as a remove. So I'm going to put it just at average for the moment. It's got great historical significance to F1. I wouldn't be removing it from the calendar, but the racing it produces is awful. A fix to this would be to create longer straights, which would allow some more overtaking opportunity, or for just to turn the cars into Formula E cars just for that race, because they seem to be able to race extremely well around Monaco. But I'm not saying it should leave. It has to stay on the calendar, I believe. It's unique. There's no other race like it, but hopefully, please do something to fix the overtaking. Montreal, this might be quite controversial. I don't like the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. It's going into no thanks. I can understand why some people like it and why it probably should remain on the calendar. I'm not arguing that it should be taken off. It's not in the remove section. I just really don't like the track. I don't think the straights are long enough to allow proper overtaking. I think that the final chicane is too quick to allow cars to really overtake through it. And I actually would blame it on the downforce configurations the cars run there. They run quite low downforce at Montreal just because it's a lot of straights. And that means that the tow you get and the DRS isn't as effective as it is at some other tracks. So I think that really inhibits the ability of the following car to overtake. I would maybe try putting a 4th DRS zone into the hairpin, but that just might turn it into an entire DRS track with 3/4 of the track being DRS. So I'm not sure. I just don't really like the track, in all honesty. I would still keep it on the calendar. I just don't like the track and the layout it has. Monza is going into decent for me. It's iconic. It has to remain on the F1 calendar. It's unique to the drivers in the fact that it's basically just fully straight and you have to run extremely low downforce. But I don't think it produces great racing. This year's race was pretty decent, as Ferrari was able to put up a solid challenge to Red Bull, but I just don't think Monza produces good racing. As similar to Montreal, that cars run such low downforce that you just can't get a tow, and the DRS is so ineffective, and you can't really follow closely through the parabolica that you just can't get close enough to the car ahead to really overtake, and it just becomes a large DRS train. So should remain on the calendar. It's a decent track, but it's not outstanding for me. Losail is going into very good. I think this year's race was outstanding at Losail. I find it interesting that the new 2022 red cars race a lot better around here than the 2021 cars do. You can overtake into multiple different sections. You don't just need to wait for the DRS down the main straight. And it's unique. It's mainly a motorbike track. It was designed for motorbikes, so it's basically no slow speed corners, all medium speed corners. And I just think it's interesting, it's unique, and it should remain on the calendar. And it also provides good racing, so it's going in very good. Red Bull Ring is straight into must-have. It came back onto the calendar in 2014, and I think it's basically delivered each year. It's the 3 DRS straights in a row, followed by that infield section made of medium-speed corners, and I think the track is great. It provides good racing. Qualifying is interesting to watch as well. Track limits are an issue, but I just think that adds to the track itself. And it's got the shortest lap time of the entire calendar. So I think the track provides great racing. You get to see the Orange Army turn out in support for Max Verstappen. So honestly, I think I have to keep it on the calendar. I don't think it should even be a discussion. Bahrain is going straight into very good. I love the track. It's good racing. One thing that I think lets it down is dissimilar to the European circuits. You don't really get that inherently F1 fan base turning up, those fanatical fans, which I think if it did, I'd probably put it into a must-have category. But the track layout itself is very good. It allows for good racing. It's interesting. And apart from this year, really, when Verstappen walked away with the win easily, or drove away with the win very easily, it's been great for F1 and for racing. So it's a very good track, and definitely keep it on the calendar. Silverstone, straight into must-have. I don't think I need to say much about Silverstone. An iconic track. It's had many layouts, but this current layout, I think, is very decent for racing and for the cars to allow them to follow closely and make overtakes. Qualifying is great to watch. You get the British crowd that always turn out in support of Hamilton, Russell, and Norris, and you can't get rid of Silverstone off the F1 track. It's too iconic and too good of a racetrack to remove. Marina Bay is straight into decent for me. I think it's a decent track. It's unique. It was F1's first ever night race. It used to be the longest race on the F1 calendar until I think this year when they changed the layout because of construction. But it's a great track. It's unique again, which I think is incredibly important when talking about an F1 track. You don't want 22 or 21 of the exact same track each week because that gets boring. And Marina Bay is iconic. It provides great challenges for the driver. It really tests out a car's mechanical platform, and it has to remain on the calendar. Spa, Suzuka, and Zandvoort. All very interesting tracks here. Spa, I'm going to put into very good. I think, Spa's an iconic track. It has to remain on the F1 calendar. It's got its fans that turn out in droves. It's the longest lap on the F1 calendar. But the racing, I don't think is that great, actually. I don't really remember any banging Spa races we've had over the past 5 or 6 years. None really stick out to me. So it's going in very good because I don't think the racing is as good as many of the other tracks in must have, but it's iconic, you get the fans, and it provides such a great driving challenge, especially in qualifying, that it must remain on the calendar. Suzuka, it's going straight into must have. There is no other track on the F1 calendar that's configured like a figure eight. It's got its iconic S's section, it's got the 2 Dagners, it's got the hairpin, it's got Spoon, it's got 130R. There's so many iconic corners at Suzuka that it has to remain on the calendar. I think it produces very good racing too. The cars can really fight into that first corner with the inside. You can overtake on the outside as well. And watching cars try and overtake through 130R is always great to see. So Suzuka's an especially important part of the F1 calendar, and it must remain on it. Finally, Zandvoort. Zandvoort's going in very good. I'm actually a mega fan of the Zandvoort circuit itself, the layout. I love the banked corners they have at turn 3 and the final corner. I think that really adds to the track. I like where it's situated in the sand dunes. It really undulates with the flow of the land, and I think that makes it incredibly unique. Whilst the racing might not be the greatest, I actually think it was much improved this year and the previous year with the ability to open DRS through that banked corner, because it actually makes the DRS straight basically as long as many of the others on the calendar. I think it was the same length as actually Spa's DRS down the Kemmel Straight. So it's quite long, and I think that actually allowed the cars to overtake quite well, but it's still not up there with Silverstone or Interlagos or Austin with its ability to produce great overtaking. But I think it's a unique track. You get the Dutch fans turning out, and I love the atmosphere it provides. So this is the tier list finished. There's a lot of tracks in must have very good. There's 3 in remove, so that opens up 3 slots on the calendar for other tracks to come in. I'd be looking at Sepang, either Hockenheim or the Nürburgring to come back in. Honestly, there's lots of options for tracks that I would like to see back on the calendar. I think the calendar we have at the moment is pretty good in terms of tracks that we have. There's really only, again, 3 or 4 tracks that I think deserve to genuinely be just removed from the calendar, full stop. The other ones I'm happy with having. But what do you guys think? Feel free to complete a tier list and then share it with me either via my TikTok. You can find me on Twitter as well, or just in the YouTube comments section below. But thanks very much for watching, and have a good day.